All right. Hi again to everyone. My name is Hala Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, as always, I am so pleased to introduce you to today's event, which is Intercultural Memoir. Today, we'll be hearing from Wilson Semitti reading from A Boy Who Loved Me, released July 21st, 2022. Rebecca Beardsall reading from The Unfurling FROND, a memoir of belonging and becoming, released October 10th, 2023. And James A. Wolter reading from Finding Miss FONG, released November 7th. All three authors' books can be purchased both from online retailers and from select bookstores. As always, also, you can always order the books from Atmosphere Press's website as well, and that's at atmospherepress.com/books. And I'm just going to drop some some links in the chat here so you can check those out directly on our website. So at the end of today's event, we will also have time for audience questions. So during the reading, if you've got a question for one or more of our authors, just go ahead and type that in the chat and I will make sure it gets asked. And then during the actual reading itself, please stay muted to keep extraneous sound at a minimum. Of course, the chat can always also be used for any praise and comments you'd like to share. And one last note before we officially start, we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. And if you've got a book manuscript of your own, we would love to read it. So submit your work today to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting Wilson, Rebecca, and Jim. We'll start off with our first reader, who is Wilson Semitti. Wilson was born in Nsambia, Kampala, Uganda. After completing his advanced levels in Uganda, he attended college in Johannesburg, South Africa, where he majored in accounts and finance. After college, he had a number of odd jobs: graphic designer, customer service agent, forex trader, teacher, movie extra, before finding work as a writer. This is his first published book. And in this book, A Boy Who Loved Me, with acuity and precision, Wilson writes about his queerness in his home country of Uganda and the political and social implications of coming out and coming of age in a country of turmoil and violence. This sprawling memoir traces Wilson Semitti's decades-long journey from Uganda to the far reaches of the world, Thailand, China, South Africa, and beyond, without letting the sickle cell chronic disease he was born with define him. And with that, Wilson, you can go ahead and unmute your microphone and begin your reading.
Thank you so much, Hala, for that introduction. I am so appreciative of each and everyone who turned up for this event. I had trouble choosing where to read from. I just chose the chapter which I'm going to read randomly. And I'm going to read chapter 12. This is the first time I arrived in South Africa in 1996. Seeing South Africa for the first time was so breathtaking. I was witnessing advancement on all levels. My first impression felt like I was on a different continent. In my previous travels of Africa, I had seen many beautiful countries from Uganda all the way down to Zimbabwe. It was a lot different and unique from country to country, but South Africa was far more advanced than any country I had been to. Dr. Lumo was a godsend. Not only did he give us accommodation, but he was also taking care of all our basic things for one to survive. My heart went out to him because when we arrived at his home, he had another whole family he was taking care of, the Chigonya family, who had traveled hundreds of miles from Kuhlman to settle in Johannesburg. Their house was full of people, 13 to be exact. I thought that a man who can take care of 10 people who are not directly related to him in those days had a heart of gold. We are not just living anywhere, but in Bedford View, a nice suburb not far from Eastgate Shopping Mall. At the time, I didn't allow I didn't know how much it cost to run a household because I was still young. Now, as an adult, I have so much respect for him. I don't know the full story of the Chigonia family or why they had left Coleman, so I won't say much about them. But for me and on Paul's behalf, I'll forever be grateful to Dr. Lomo. I can't imagine how it would have turned out without him. Uh, we would have had a start from the we would if without him we would have had a start from the streets. We arrived in the middle of March, so it wasn't long before we experienced our first winter. When winter arrived, I was so grateful to Dr. Romo to have a warm bed and a warm roof over my head. I knew deep down that if it wasn't for his kindness, my sickle cell anemia disease, I wouldn't have survived the winter on the streets. To this day, I haven't been able to thank him properly. I hope that one day I'll get the opportunity to thank him properly in person. And I hope if he ever comes across my notebook, he will understand how grateful I am to him. Paul couldn't get over the fact that South African police were cruising around in BMWs. We noticed a lot of differences between our two countries. For me, two things stood out. And I knew that I'll never go back to Uganda, at least not to stay unless the laws regarding the LGBTQI plus changed. It will take a very long time, and I may never witness that in my lifetime. People in Uganda have a very bad attitude when it comes to someone different. It will take a very long time for people to embrace other people's differences. Every suburb had a fire station compared to the one fire station in Kampala on Queensway. Mentioning a fire station brought memories of fire trucks being kept without water till the fire broke out in the city. I had witnessed a house when I was growing up burning to ashes. The fire brigade took longer to come since the trucks had to make a detour so that they could be filled with water. In the first days, Paul and I took long walks every day because we had nothing to do. We oriented ourselves with where we are. When I passed through fire stations, this put tears in my eyes. I don't know why I was so emotional, but it reminded me of how many people lose lives in Uganda because we don't have enough firehouses to cater for the whole city. The second thing that stood out was the South African ambulance. I tried to recall seeing ambulances or being taken in one to a hospital, but I couldn't recall any. I had been admitted 4 to 6 times a year to various hospitals. Always my mom and stepfather had to find a way of taking me there. I was so blown away with all the facilities that make day-to-day life a little bit easier. I found myself appreciating it more than perhaps the South African people had grown accustomed to them. For me, I thought that people try to find love all day, every day in the wrong places. This was evidence of love that was readily available to everyone who entered South Africa. I knew that perhaps I just appreciated more of the South African lifestyle than most people. I hope to stay here forever, but that notion disappeared quickly for reasons I'll share later. I just wanted to complete my college qualifications and move on. After about a month, I found myself alone in a car with Dr. Lomo. He asked me about my plans. I told him I wanted to finish college. This was a perfect moment I chose to tell him about my other uncle, Dr. Waswa, who lived in Pretoria. I explained to him that I had only met him twice before. On both occasions, he was visiting Uganda due to family circumstances. Dr. Lumo knew him very well, but he wanted to know the whole story. He wanted to know why I hadn't contacted him when I became so passionate about leaving Uganda, or why I hadn't asked him for help during the 2 times I had met with him in Uganda. He also wanted to know why I had met him only twice at my age. I had to tell him the whole story of how I came into the family only 5 years earlier. The conversation was a little bit uncomfortable for me. I had reached out to my uncle, but he never responded to any of my letters. Back in the day, the best way or the only way I remember communicating was by writing letters or faxing, but I didn't have his fax number. Dr. Lumu had forgotten that we met once in Uganda as he asked me where I had got his details from. In that moment, I reminded him that we had met a year ago in Kampala. I also emphasized that he had come to pick his two children. I reminded him of the chance meeting when Freddie came with me to see him. We had been talking without looking at each other because he was driving, but in that moment, he faced me as he remembered that chance meeting. He remembered giving me his business card, and that's when he also remembered Freddie. He asked me why I was with Paul instead of Freddie. I explained to him that it was because of family problems as per Freddie's explanation. He wished we had reached out to him regarding Freddie. I knew how private Freddie is, so instead of answering him, I decided to come clean about my sickle cell condition. He told me that he was going to do everything in his power to help me. That same day, he changed directions of going to one of his surgeries, and he took me to college. He told me that this is the college he thought was perfect after I explained to him what I wanted to do. Honestly, that was a lie. I never wanted to be an accountant or work in a corner office. But because my newfound father was a manager in an executive position in a Uganda commercial bank, I thought finance and accounting would be good to fall into his footsteps. Had I known what I know now, I wouldn't have bothered with finance and accounting qualifications. I would have gone to an art school because I love being on stage. I had grown up being told by both sides of my parents and teachers to be practical about the future and education. I was often told to face reality, but now I understand that I am the creator of my reality, and I have my hands in the clay, molding it into place as I choose whatever I'm passionate about. After we had found the college, he took me into the Home Affairs to apply for a student visa. My tourist visa was running out in 2 months or less. He told me that because of my sickle cell disease, I'll be living permanently with him if I wanted to. The Chigonia family had left by then, and Paul went with them because he had made friends with them. He also told me since he will be accommodating me, feeding me, and dropping me to college every day, he was going to put me in touch with Dr. Waswa to pay for my tuition. He told me not to be harsh with Dr. Waswa for not responding to my letters. He told me he knew him very well, and in fact, he was also back at university specializing in the same field as him. He continued to defend him, saying that working, studying, and raising a family meant he was a busy man. He went on to say that he may have not even read the letters. I was doubtful, but I made no comment, as it was clear that his intention was to get us closer. When I finally visited my uncle, Dr. Waswa, it was exactly as Dr. Loma had said. He turned out to be a wonderful man, and the timing of him being in my life at that moment in time, was a huge blessing. He knew so much about sickle cells compared to Dr. Lumu, because my cousin was also suffering from it. Since I wasn't attending any specific hematology clinic for it, as it was not common in South Africa, I came to rely on Dr. Waswa for my sickle cells. It's like I had a private doctor available whenever I needed him, and in those 3 years, he was my only doctor. I remember having only one admission, and I only stayed for a day because he preferred to treat me from home. Each time I had a crisis coming on, Dr. Lomo would help me with transport from Johannesburg to Pretoria. It felt like I was meant to be in South Africa because everything was working out perfectly, and the fear of leaving home with sickle cell slowly disappeared. I appreciated the openness of homosexuality in South Africa. I was surprised to see bars, venues, and men looking for men being advertised in newspapers. I was in the closet, but I used to browse the newspapers to find out what was happening in the gay community. Occasionally, I snuck out without telling anyone and went to gay bars and nightclubs. I knew that Dr. Lumo knew this, but he turned a blind eye. It was in South Africa where I attended my first ever gay pride. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. All the pretty boys dancing half naked on the backs of the trucks. This was the first time I saw drag queens. I knew then that this was the community that I was part of, no matter how much I tried to hide my true self. I was not ready to come out because I was not ready to deal with the consequences. I still enjoyed the parties that I was invited to in our Ugandan communities in South Africa. And if I was out, all that would stop. I can't begin to tell you the power that is embedded in fear of rejection. I realized that there were many people in my community who will stay closeted till they transition from this world. Sometimes I felt that the reason I fought so hard to leave Uganda was to be free and true to myself. Now, because I was predominantly in the Ugandan communities, I felt trapped. But at the time, I knew that I would never stop the quest of finding freedom and living my life the way I was meant to, which was happiness regardless of who I went to bed with. After a year in South Africa, I realized that there was more to the only reason my mother had let me go. Normally, she wouldn't have let me go without giving me a million reasons why I shouldn't go because of my sickle cell disease. She had let me go so easily because she was keeping a secret. She had been diagnosed with breast cancer and she was concealing the illness from me before I left. She was concealing the illness from me. Before I left, I knew something wasn't right, but I never asked. We talked from time to time over the phone, and I often felt that she was putting in much effort to sound happy. I never knew that she was on her dying bed when we were having those conversations. She died only after a year after saying goodbye to her. I only found out 3 days after she was already buried. I don't know how I would have handled this if it was not for Auntie Sarah, Dr. Wasso's wife, with whom I connected on a much higher level. I have great admiration for her being there for me during this difficult time emotionally. Writing this part of the chapter has brought up so many memories, and I can't concentrate anymore. My mind drifted back to the boy as I wondered how he was doing after losing his parents in such a short time. I wished he didn't try to be so strong and shared what he was going through emotionally. My mom had passed a long time ago, but if thinking about her makes me feel all these emotions, the boy must be suffering alone in silence. I thought of ways in which I could help him, but came up with nothing. To stop myself from this train of thoughts, I decided to distract myself by packing for Beijing. Thank you for listening to me. This is the end of the chapter I was reading.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wilson. Your views of just so many different peoples and places is so refreshing. So it's really a pleasure to see through your eyes in this chapter, but really throughout the memoir. So thank you. Reading next is Rebecca Beardsall. Rebecca, MA from Lehigh University and MFA from Western Washington University, is the author of 2 memoirs, The Unfurling FROND and My Place in the Spiral. She is the co-editor of 3 books, including Philadelphia Reflections, Stories from the Delaware to the Schuylkill. She grew up in Quakertown, Pennsylvania, and has lived in various places, including Scotland, Canada, Montana, and Aotearoa/New Zealand. She currently resides in Bellingham, Washington. In the unfurling frond, we see that the land holds a story of time, of generations. Rebecca's transnational narrative investigates land and place as physical space, home, and moments in time. The collection wrestles with the concept of personal transformation through time with the added complexity of exploring settler colonization. And with that, Rebecca, you're on.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today with Wilson and James and reading from my memoir. I'm going to read 3 short chapters, but just to give you some context, when I mentioned Jeff, that's my husband from New Zealand. So you'll understand that in a minute, but I just thought I'd let you know because you won't get that from the sections that I'm reading. So the first one, molasses. I am alone in our apartment, windows open out to the noise of the city on Friday night. I call Jeff at work and ask where I can buy molasses. Molasses? That's cattle food. No, it's not. I want to make cupcakes. Revulsion rings through the receiver. I page through my Mennonite cookbook. Its list of ingredients, now exotic, tempts me. I leave my safe zone to join the stream of people walking Queen Street. At the corner dairy, I seek the labels of my childhood, names that force my German tongue to its root. Amongst the sea of Waddy's products, I spy a glass bottle, slightly dusty, which brings promise and memories swirling. I open the bottle at home with hopes of sugary, earthy goodness. Spoon drips slowly into the thick brown-black syrup. Catching the expanding string on my finger, I lift it to my lips, my longing mislaid in bitterness. He arrives home and sees the open bottle of molasses. Did you make cupcakes? No, that stuff's disgusting. Jeff shakes his head in the I told you so tone, and I'm stuck eating pavlova with bright yellow larvae-like seeds of passion fruit. And the second one I'm going to read is Vision to Venture. Vision to Venture are the words engraved on his headstone. They rest there in granite on bottom right under Dwayne E. Helm, May 18, 1966, March 13, 1992. Yet of the 3 of Bob and Marilyn Helm's children, I will be the only one to traverse the world, to venture. I will slowly start to untwine myself from the roots sunk deep down in the clay soil of Bucks County, Pennsylvania. I take my twisting stem that marks me as Pennsylvania German and weave myself in and out of the known and the unknown until I am able to unknot myself from the root system and leave the land that holds my ancestors in cemeteries from German Lutheran Cemetery in Philadelphia to St. John's Lutheran on Sleepy Hollow Road in Spinnerstown. I will wander and find places to hold me to become home, Aotearoa, New Zealand, Bellingham, Washington, but none of this would have happened without my brother. March 13, 1992, unrooted me, loosened the soil that bonded me to Pennsylvania, but still holds Dwayne. It wasn't a vision that caused me to venture. It was a life lost in an instant that spurred me to move on and into myself. And the last chapter I'm going to read is Awake. I woke up early. I was going to crawl back to bed to write, but I didn't want to wake Jeff. I thought about the cafe, Mud Bay, the only cafe in Uranui, but I didn't know if they were open on Sundays. So I decided to walk to the beach, to sit on the bench where Jeff and I sat last time we were here. Tiny spots of blue peeked out from the clouded sky, low tide with its bite in the sea breeze. The birds trilled and tried their best to compete with the pounding surf. The day before, I explored Oronui with a Kayatiki Maori leader and received my DNA results, a glimpse at my own ancestors through a list of numbers and percentages on an electronic page. The Maori Kayatiki made a remark about the need to let the past wrongs go in order to move forward for a better blended society. I contemplated the movement of time as I watched the ocean and land combined. Nation and land tried to stand firm as the surf pulled and pushed the land away and back into itself. The white cliffs, highlighted by the dawn sun, uncovered deposits of land, the past. Aotearoa's history opened wide by the sea. I sought the teal waves for answers and realized they already revealed it to me in the land left behind. Exposed, like me, firm in place, but marked by layers of history, long forgotten, buried, but awakened by the sea. The land here has a story in the layers, much like I have a story in the lines of the lands that rest beneath my ancestors' feet. And here I am on a foreign shore trying to add to the layers, to find where I fit into two nations, two lands, two people. Did we create a home? Did we have to destroy the old for the new? Where do we fit now? We are unplaced, yet firmly placed in the lands of our birth. Does this water shape me? I'd like to think so. It awakened in me a seafaring woman lost in the ages of cities and farms and towns of Pennsylvania. Encrusted on the top of the old, the water, the Pacific, the Tasman, reshaped me and exposed me to myself. Jeff helped me by taking me to the water, to the land of his birth, to an island in the South Pacific, to a new, uncovered time. I travel between my two selves, two moments in time, my histories, two nations' histories, never knowing where I really belong. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I think the chat agrees with me from what I'm seeing, but really the image that you paint with the fine details, the passion fruit seeds, the trilling birds, it really just brings your narrative to life so well. So thank you for painting such a vivid image for us. All right, so our final reader for today is James A. Wolter. A lifelong Chicagoan, Jim has been dedicated to education, serving as a special education teacher, a public school administrator, a university professor, and an administrative law judge. Now retired, his hobbies and creative endeavors include writing and sculpting. Jim is an experienced public speaker and has short stories published in Worldview magazine and an essay published in Peace Corps Worldwide and in U.S. News and World Report. Northern Illinois University has serialized online his discussions about the innovations he created while teaching in Malaysia. Today, we'll be hearing from Finding Miss Fong. It's the journey of a naive 22-year-old from the northwest side of Chicago trying to find his way in an unfamiliar world back in the early 1960s. As a biologist from a working-class background thrust into post-colonial Malaya, he finds himself caught up in unexpected adventures while struggling with disillusionment in work and juggling entanglements in love. So, Jim, go ahead and take the virtual podium.
Thank you, Hyla, and Wilson and Rebecca. It's a joy to meet you finally and to be on this program with you. I'm going to show you my book. I don't know if you could, Finding Miss Fong. The cover is designed by Fong Mokchi, who happens to be Mokchi Wolter, and it's one of her paintings called Moon Over Tricano, and this is outside my house, which was 200 yards off the South China Sea. The book covers the time that I was in the Peace Corps from 1961 to 1966, and you'll find it's similar to other Peace Corps books. All of us experienced difficulties on the job, many humorous incidents, getting sick, losing weight, etc. I I'm going to pick a place that's pivotal in this book. It's similar to all the other books, but I'm going to pick one that's different than other Peace Corps memoirs and pivotal in my life. It's in chapter 18, and it's called First Kiss. Leading up to this, I have to tell you that I lost 60 pounds and had to get new clothes. So I went to Penang, which was a free port, to have clothes made and at a cheaper price than on the mainland. And Mokchi was from Penang. I met her at a teachers union picnic, and she offered to negotiate with the tailor so that I wouldn't get charged the European price. And so she negotiates for me. My trousers were supposed to be done overnight, and I was going to move on and visit another Peace Corps volunteer who invited me to spend a week with her. However, my trousers weren't done overnight. They would be done in 3 nights. They weren't done in 3 nights. They would be done by the end of the week, as it turns out. So I end up spending a whole week with Miss FONG in Malaysia. She happens to be staying with friends of the family atop Penang Hill in a marvelous bungalow that was built during colonial times for British civil servants to get away from the heat of Malaysia and, candidly, to get away from Malaysians. So I get to stay in this mansion of what's called a cottage, a building that I could never imagine staying in. And each day we go up and down the hill in a tram to stay overnight in the cottage, but come down in the tram to visit with her mother and father and her nanny, who she's committed to taking care of. So let's go now to First Kiss.
Sorry, Jim, go ahead. I think I accidentally muted you there, but we're ready now.
Somebody else came in and it was quite interesting. All right, first kiss. It was dark, a time when street hooligans grew brave. So Mokchi hailed a trishaw to take us to the McAllister Road bus terminal. And then we took the Ayer Itam bus to the tram. This would be our last night up the hill and our last tram ride. Riding the quaint green cars up Penang Hill was dreamlike in and of itself, but riding alongside Mokchi made the dream complete. The only drawback, from my perspective, was this would be our last trip up the hill, and the dream would come to an end. We exited the car. The night was clear, free of clouds, the clearest of all nights. Sparkling stars blanketed the inky black sky above. They seemed close enough to reach out and grab. Mokchi and I held hands, walking at a pace barely beyond still. And if we were talking, the conversation wasn't registering. There was a bend in the path that, in my mind, was our bend, Mokchi's and mine, secluded but offering the best view of Georgetown's tiny twinkling Technicolor lights below. We paused there, as we had every night, and like nights before, I didn't want this moment, to end. I desperately wanted to hold on to the magic of the night and delay going back to the cottage. It was a lovely cottage, lovelier than I had ever stayed in before, and lovelier than any home I was likely to stay in again. But it was a cottage filled with people, and I would have to share Mokchi with those people. I wanted her alone, all to myself, on this last night, until forever. I start out pointing out constellations to Mokchi. My favorite, Orion, was relatively easy to see. Mokchi loved reading myths and legends and told me about the Greek myth of Orion, the son of a poor shepherd called Hyrieus, having designs on 7 daughters of the Titan god Atlas. Mokchi asked me to point out Pleiades, the 7 sisters turned into stars by Zeus to protect them from Orion. I was delighted and pleased with Mokchi's telling of Greek legends associated with the constellations. Pleased because it stalled the return to the cottage. I knew the constellations, but not the myths associated with them. So I told Mokchi that I didn't know Orion was such a rogue figure in mythology, but he was my favorite because he was so easy to find in the sky. In the States, when helping point out constellations to new stargazers, I had the benefit of using a torchlight. Torchlight is Malaysian for flashlight beam to direct the viewers. But here I didn't have a flashlight. So I put my left arm around Mokchi's back and I put my head next to her head and pointed at Pleiades with my right arm. I glanced over at Mokchi to make sure she was looking in the right direction. Mokchi had such an earnest look on her face as she struggled to find the seven sisters frozen in the sky. I looked at the profile of her lips. They looked as puffy and temptingly kissable as the first time I saw them from the bus at the Teachers Union picnic in Basut. I couldn't help it. I didn't even think. But intuitively, I knew I shouldn't. In America, kiss on the first date or second date is no big thing. Girls kissed all sorts of boys and moved on to another, and likewise kissed the new boys. But in Malaya, a kiss was more than just a kiss, and I knew it. But my heart, which had admirably been held in check by my mind until now, had the better of me. And there, in that secluded bend, along the quiet blacktop footpath suspended between the star-strewn, inky blue sky above and the twinkling technicolored lights dancing in distant Georgetown below, we had our first kiss. I leaned over and gave her just a brief and admittedly clumsy peck. I wasn't thinking. She could have slapped my face or walked off or worse, laughed at me. And I wasn't thinking. I just gave in to an impulse and kissed her and was absolutely thrilled she kissed me back. There was no long, passionate follow-up kiss. None was needed. It was just a brief and admittedly clumsy peck, but enough to ignite a lifelong courtship. Mokchi turned and buried her face in my chest while I wrapped my arms around her and held her tight. And in that instant, with the two of us alone atop Penang Hill, I felt that my life was complete. I held Mokchi like that, both arms wrapped around her waist and her arms around my neck. I pulled her tight against me. She was soft and warm. I could feel her chest surging, taking in the night air, and I synchronized my breath with hers, holding her in the still, cool, hot hilltop air. Her head buried in my chest and my cheek against her head. I wondered where this romance would lead, and I wondered if she wondered too. And I worried. And I think that's enough.
All right. Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank
The
you.
romance is absolutely palpable in your story. So I'm sure many audience members are finding themselves needing to know what happens next. So go ahead. Of course, everyone check out those links I've been dropping in the chat. But at this point, we have about 15-20 minutes for our audience Q&A. So if anyone in the audience has a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type it in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. Authors, that includes, if there's anything you're dying to know about one another, feel free to put that in the chat as well. I have already received a couple of questions, so I'm going to go ahead and start off with these, but throughout, feel free to be typing in that chat there. So the first question is for all three of you, and this question is, writing a memoir seems to require a lot of delving into personal experiences and interactions. Were you ever nervous about publishing stories about other people, and how did you approach that? Rebecca, do you want to start us off with this one?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's always tricky writing about other people. I think when it was very specific about individuals, I actually sent the chapters to them to read and review, to make sure that they were okay with it before I put it in there. But if it was more general, kind of scenarios or things that happened, I didn't go to that level, but there are a few in there, because there's even some with like kids in there, and I wanted to make sure that everyone was okay with that. So I would recommend, if you're nervous about it, send it to the people and then have them look at it.
Yeah, definitely the age-old question about whether to run it by people first. Wilson, do you want to talk about this as well? Were you ever nervous about publishing stories about other people, and how did you approach that?
I was truly nervous about writing other people, and especially the book I wrote about being different. Most people where I come from, they don't want to be associated with that kind of writing. And I told myself the main thing here, if I'm going to write, is to have to be authentic. And if I try to down it a little bit, or not write some people, or to write off some people, it's not going to be genuine even to me when I read it back. So I just had to be okay. My drive was just to highlight the issues we are dealing with as gay people in Uganda. So that gave me the drive to just write what I had to write.
Yeah, speaking the truth because it has to be said, totally. And Jim, what about you? Were you ever nervous about publishing stories about other people, and how'd you approach that?
Well, I wrote in the moment. I wrote as the 22-year-old Jim Wolter, and my responses to people and to events. My responses now, after 60 years, and my evaluations of people would be quite a bit different, actually. But I wanted to write as I saw them at that time. I was concerned. I did have a conversation with a fellow by the name of John Coyne, who is a Peace Corps volunteer, former Peace Corps volunteer, and supports a lot of writers and writes quite a bit himself. And his advice to me, if somebody doesn't like what you wrote about them, then they could write their own book and correct it and give their own version of the story. So I did change names. I am concerned that some people may, identify with some things. I have to admit that I did edit out some things that I thought would be too hurtful to people. I also had a marvelous editor, Catherine Sopranos, who helped me to make sure that I was telling the story truthfully, but not in a way that would be too offensive or hurtful to others.
Yeah, definitely. I have to say, I love that piece of advice, well, they can just write their, their own story and share it, right? But yeah, thank you to all three of you for that. This is another question for all three of you, and I'm assuming this is because we've heard so much about all of your travels around the world. But for all of you, where is your favorite country that you have ever lived? Maybe Wilson, do you want to start us off with this one?
Thank you, Haley, and thank you for that question. I've been lucky that I've traveled around a lot, but in all the places I've been to, my heart fell in love with Thailand because I find that people really welcomed me as a different person. And back then, when I arrived in Thailand, there weren't so many Black people. I was like a celebrity just because I was Black, and I felt in love with the place. So, of all the places I've been to this day, Thailand is my favorite.
Yeah, definitely. I hear a lot of good things about it, so totally believe that. Rebecca, what about you? A favorite country that you've lived in?
That would definitely be Aotearoa, New Zealand. I actually just came back from there. I think and it's in the memoir, but I think there's such a spiritual connection there to the land and to the place, that I've never felt anywhere else. But obviously I don't live there, so it's like this struggle constantly of wanting to go back and be in that place. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Again, totally in line with what I've heard about these places. So it's inspiring to continue to hear that. What about you, Jim? A favorite place that or country that you've ever lived in?
Well, Rebecca and Wilson, you've had more countries than I have lived in. I love living in the United States. I love being able to say what I think and not worry that I'm going to get locked up. I like the opportunity that through my own effort, I could go as far as my skills will take me or my efforts will take me. I loved every place where I did live. I have special feelings for that little cove up on top Penang Hill. I loved living in Batu Gajah, where Mochi and I had our first home and where our 2 children were born. But right here in the United States, it couldn't be better. I'm absolutely close to paradise here.
I cannot blame you for that as someone with very warm feelings for my Midwestern home. So totally understand. We do have, this is another question actually for all 3 of you. This person wants to know, do you have any advice for young writers who want to embark on the journey of writing their memoir? And I think by young writers, they mean like writers just starting out of any age. And kind of this is building off our first question, but going back to you, Jim, do you have any advice for young writers or just starting writers about writing their memoir?
Well, absolutely do it. And absolutely, every young person should keep a journal and write down what you're doing. You may not think it's important, but at some point when you get older and you read that journal, it'll stimulate some ideas. It'll also make each day that you live richer because you'll reflect on it and bring it to your next day. I was journaling, but I had to destroy my journal because I got quasi arrested by 2 military people who were accused me of being a CIA because of I was writing things down and keeping track of things and taking photographs. So after I got away from them, it's in the book, I ended up burning the journal and I didn't keep any further journal. And I missed that. Everything I wrote had to be based on recall of an 85-year-old person. So you're young, definitely. Right now, click off of this program and go and write. That's it.
Yeah, totally. That I think the journal thing is so underrated, especially for memoir writers. So totally, I fully endorse that piece of advice as well. Rebecca, going back to you, any advice that you've got for writers embarking on their memoir writing journey?
Sorry, my unmute was taking a while. Yeah, I coach some clients in this space, and I think the big thing is not to get overwhelmed, like not to think about, I have to figure out how I'm going to tell my whole story and what that process is, to just start and break it down into little sections of what you remember, what you want to talk about. I call them islands, but whatever you want to do to create that. And then it will all come together. When you have those created, you can kind of see how they work together, or if they don't, does it not get put in the book in the end? But it really is, don't get overwhelmed and stay in your small chunks, and those small chunks will build quite quickly into a larger book. So that's my advice.
Yeah, one foot in front of the other never fails me. So, and Wilson, how about you? Any advice for writers embarking on their memoir journey?
Thank you. Honestly, you have the passion to write. Just go for it. For me, this is my first book, and I'm not in the field of writing, but I was doing writing in Thailand just to survive. I was doing writing for money. And then I turned up in China with a lot of time on my hand, and I said, what should I do? And I started writing. And when I presented my manuscript to Atmosphere Press, I didn't believe they would even publish it. I was just overjoyed when they said they're going to go ahead and publish it. So if you feel like you want to write, just start writing. You don't know where it's going to end.
Exactly, just right. It's tried and true for sure. We've got another question. This is for, again, all three of you. And this is from Karen for all three of you in the chat. She says, I have written a memoir as well, and I struggle with marketing. So I'm wondering if the three of you could talk a bit about your experience after publication, after the writing, in promoting the book and going through marketing, if you have any advice about that. Going back to you, Wilson, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Honestly, Hailey, I don't know what to say because everything I know about marketing a book is from you. And I have so much love and appreciation for what you've done for me because I had nothing. I don't know nothing. What I would say, just choose a good publisher like Atmosphere Press to market your book. They will show you the hopes because I didn't know anything and I'm new in this game. The only advice is to seek knowledge from people who know about marketing a book, and Atmosphere Press is good as any. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. And I'm so happy to be a part of your publishing journey. So thank you very much, Wilson. Jumping to Jim now, do you have any advice about marketing, or maybe do you want to talk about your experience with what's worked for you?
I want to jump on what you said, Wilson. Hala, you've been really very helpful in marketing, finding Miss Fong. Prior to the book being released, I was an unabashed self-promoter, and maybe you can see my T-shirt. All the family and kids and grandkids are wearing these T-shirts. I looked forward to the opportunity to visit people and do book signings and to be on chat room like this. Once the book was released, I didn't want to do any of that. I feel like my feeling is I'm done with it and I'm on to my next writing venture. And I was an unabashed self-promoter, and I've become shy with that. And that's wrong. I think you just have to go out. You have a story, Rebecca, Wilson, you have a story. You work hard to share it with people. Anyone who's listening to this podcast, you have a story. You've worked hard to share it. It's worth sharing. People want to know it. They need to know it. Go out and let them know you have a story and that they should read about it and they should know it. It'll enrich their lives. That's all I have to say.
First of all, I have to say that shirt is amazing. I'm so glad you showed it to us. And second of all, yeah, the self-promo bit is so tough because, you know, it's sensitive to put your work out there, but completely echo your sentiments, Jim. That's great. And Rebecca, do you want to give us any closing words about your marketing experience and advice?
Yeah, again, I'd echo what Jim and Wilson have said about Atmosphere Press, and the support that they offer in that space has been amazing. I think, you know, starting with something simple like having a web presence, that you have a website that kind of starts telling about your book, is important. Social media is a fraught space sometimes, but I seem to be, you know, doing well in that area. But it's not just always about the book in that space. It's about sharing who you are and your writing process. And so I think that's my one message of advice, that if you're going to use a social media platform, it isn't just about the book. It's more about you in that space, and your book is part of your story. But I also agree with Jim that once the book's out there, you're like, okay, next. It's hard to stay focused on it when you have other books that you're working on. But and events like this, it's so fun to meet new people, other authors. So yeah, just networking and connecting with other people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everything that all three of you are saying is just perfect. And especially, you know, Rebecca, being a person online is totally fine. It doesn't just have to be about your book. It's about you as the author as well. So with that, I just want to say thank you again to all three of our authors today, Wilson, Rebecca, and Jim. Just thank you for being generous, first of all, with your stories, as these are personal memoirs, but also being here with us today, sharing your thoughts, sharing your words in your voices. And of course, to the audience, thank you to all of you for being here with us to celebrate these wonderful authors. And of course, you can order A Boy Who Loved Me, The Unfurling Frond, and Finding Miss Fong from the links that I'm putting in the chat one more time. I can personally attest that they are all excellent gifts for people for the holidays. I know everyone's looking for those. So definitely check those links out. And then, of course, please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com, where you can browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for our email newsletter, or submit a book manuscript of your own. You can submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and just let us know that you attended today's event. And with that, we'll look forward to hearing from you, but that's it for today. Have a great close to your weekend, everyone.